President Macron of France has sort of said, was it really wise to use such incendiary words? What do you think?
I agree. I think that this is the first time in my memory, and I've been around since the 1980s, where the United States has not sought some level of diplomatic rapprochement as a part of a strategy to essentially wind the war down. And I think President Biden's comments will only encourage Putin, who's already paranoid, to become even more paranoid. And I think when you examine the things that are going on, I think it's in everybody's interest to take a step back and try to step away from any bellicose language. And I think it was very much the wrong move by President Biden.
A lot of people are worried that, you think, if he's using such strong terminology, does he know something we don't?
I don't think he does. I mean, I have a good team that monitors everything going on. And right now, the United States, regarding conventional weapons, is not doing well. We missed our recruiting goals for the Army. Much of our conventional forces have been depleted by the fact we've been giving equipment and weapons to Ukraine. And our nuclear forces, which obviously you and we are part of NATO, part of those forces, aren't necessarily ready for a tactical nuclear confrontation. So I don't think this is the best time to be confronting Putin. With that said, I do believe that we need to do something to ratchet back his ability to continue offensive operations. It's just a direct confrontation with nuclear weapons, I don't think is the path to go at this point.
Well, no. I mean, it's not the path to go, but can it be argued that President Biden has, in effect, he's saber rattling, isn't he? He's saying, well, look, if you are even contemplating using nuclear weapons, we are going to, I mean, saying there's going to be Armageddon says we are going to respond, doesn't it? Well, that's that's meant to be the whole point of nuclear weapons, isn't it? The sort of mutually assured destruction, which is meant to be the threat.
That is true, but if Article 5 is invoked for NATO, Ukraine is a gray area. Ukraine is not part of NATO. There's no clear policy that I'm aware of, either with your military or our military, of what happens if, say, Putin pops one off in the Pacific. There's that submarine running around out there with this doomsday torpedo that can create tsunamis. There's no clear policy if he uses that against a non-NATO nation. So. And again, my experience is, and I was raised and mentored by the Reagan senior leadership, President Reagan was great with brinksmanship, but he always offered a diplomatic path out to basically give the Russians a path to de-escalate. I just don't see that happening here, and I think that's what makes it more dangerous than the 1980s.
For President Biden, then, to have done, isn't it? Because he's a very experienced politician. Before he became president, he was vice president for years. And everybody who knows him says what an experienced politician he is and what a good man he is. So there must have been reason behind his comments. Or do you think it was just loose lips? He was at a Democratic fundraiser. He felt he was almost saying things to a private bunch of people.
Well, I think it was very much said on the spur of the moment. Look, I've testified before him in the Senate, and I have no doubt about his credentials. With that said, he's had some lapses lately of saying things off the cuff, which the White House had to immediately walk back. And this is one of those situations where the press has been asking a lot of hard follow-up questions of the Pentagon as well regarding what is the policy. And I think where there is no policy, you have a great deal of potential for miscalculation. Remember, there was a number of times during the Cold War that miscalculation in 1983, an exercise called Able Archer, almost resulted in a full-blown nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and NATO. So again, language is important. Being precise in language when you're dealing with a madman like Putin is super important. So I think in this case, President Biden probably should have been much more careful in understanding that his words do carry weight because of his credibility. And that credibility will be looked at by Putin and his deputies as something they may have to react to. And again, that's what makes this very dangerous.
But it's interesting, isn't it? You say you're talking about Reagan and what have you, and saying, well, look, there was always a way out. There was always a sort of back alley out that would allow a sort of dignified retreat, if you like. Well, that doesn't apply to Putin, does it? She said he's a madman. I mean, that seems to be the conclusion. It's not behaving in a rational way. He doesn't want a way out, does he?
So I don't know. I think the idea is you need to present it as something that he can take if it's available. Remember, the other example I've been studying is 1962 and the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was significant back-channel communications between the Khrushchev government and the President Kennedy government. And during that time, a lot of brinksmanship was very much necessary. And remember, as you mentioned in the introduction, his own people are essentially chiding him for the miscalculations and failures in Ukraine. So if nothing else, you're speaking to them. You're trying to give his people, his staff, the ability to maybe have an out that they can use to maybe even affect his thinking. So again, I think to have all options on the table to include a diplomatic resolution is necessary. And I do believe that, especially regarding nuclear weapons. I've been in nuclear exercises, something called Bulwark Bronze, which was an exercise we used to run. Every tactical exchange ever done during these exercises always results in a full-blown exchange of strategic weapons. And I don't think the world wants a nuclear exchange by superpowers or a couple of folks in Russia who think they're a superpower against what we have on our side in NATO and the United States.
God, that's really not good to hear. You're telling us that professionals like yourself, whenever you've war-gamed it, it always turns out badly, very badly.
Anytime you start using nuclear weapons, the other side feels obligated to ratchet up. And so I think that's why we have to avoid at all costs. And look, I'm not a dove. I've spent my life as a warrior, but I do understand that the consequences of any tactical exchange will often and catastrophically result in a broadening of that exchange. There's a movie called Threads that you all did back in the Cold War, the day after we did. And I hope everybody will take a look at that and understand that we do not want to see that happen. But I don't believe we should give in. We have to do this from a position of strength. But again, I think we have to give options to Putin, as mad as he is, to potentially step back from the brink of trying to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons.